All right, welcome back, everybody, and thanks for staying with us for the last few hours for our very first Investor Day. I'm thrilled to be here with my friends and colleagues at Ginkgo, who you just heard from over the past few hours, who are going to answer some of the questions that have come in through the platform and via Twitter. And so, Jason, there was one that came in that was one of my favorites, and so I'm gonna throw the first one to you. Vince on Twitter says, listening to SRNG at Ginkgo's Investor Day, pretty sure 95% of investors have no idea what these people are talking about, even though they're trying to explain the science. Everyone is waiting to hear the business revenue potential as opposed to the science behind Ginkgo. And then Costa Michaelides says, can you cover the basics in your own words? What does Ginkgo sell? To which customer? For what cost? Like, what's the business model in a couple sentences? So I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Let's see if you can do it there.
Awesome. I love it. So the core idea behind Ginkgo is cells run on digital code in the form of DNA, kind of like computers run on zeros and ones. Cells run on ATCs and Gs. Because you can program them, we should expect there's going to be app developers, right? Folks who want to program cells to do new things, take those to market, and make money doing it. Ginkgo, simply, we're an app store, right? We provide tools to folks that want to program cells to do new things to make it easier and faster for them to do it. And then we help them bring those cells to market. In exchange for that, they pay us. They pay us both while we're developing the cell, and we get, just like you would in a mobile phone app store, we get a piece of the value of the app. And that's how we make money.
That was pretty close to 30 seconds. I'll give it to you. And then on stock twits here, Odd Marketable Securities says, fancy video with lots of fancy words. Some fancy words I haven't heard them say. 15 billion and 150 million of revs. They're doing a lot of talking to not address the elephant in the room. So let's address the elephant in the room. How do we get to a $15 billion valuation with 150 million of revenue this year?
Yeah, so this comes back to, I'll touch on this app store idea again here. So there's two ways we get paid. We get paid while we're developing a cell for a customer. They pay us effectively fees for using the facility I'm sitting in front of and that Barry and Kristen walked you through earlier, our foundry, on a usage basis, right? And so, in 2021, we guide towards 100 million out of that 150 is foundry revenue from using that facility. Okay, straightforward to understand. The app store side of the business, though, ultimately, we are going to get a piece of the value of those program cells for customers back to Ginkgo. And that's a new idea in biotech. It's actually been a very, very successful business model in tech, but in biotech, you haven't really seen it. People tend to develop their own apps, right? If you're, a Genentech or a Roche, you've got a drug, you own that thing 100%. You're really a product company. Well, Ginkgo's not a product company, we're a platform. And so when these apps get developed, we get a piece either through royalties or through equity in the companies that are developing those applications. And that comes back to us in the long run, right? So in the near term, that's not where the revenues are coming, but over time, as those apps go to market, that's gonna be, in my view, the lion's share of the value of the company. And that's not included. If you look at our projections in the financial model, you and Mark walked through this in the video, that's all foundry revenue. It doesn't include that value coming back to us through royalties or equity in the applications. And so, if you look at our numbers, we ended last year with 48 cell programs like that. We're adding 23 new programs this year, 7 just in the first quarter. The rate we're adding these is going up dramatically. And when you see news, for example, last week, Motif FoodWorks announced a more than $250 million fundraise. That's great news for Ginkgo shareholders because we have, a good chunk of equity in Motif because they're an app developer on our platform. When Kronos says they're going to market with a cannabinoid, that's good news for Ginkgo, right? And so that's the part of it that ultimately is justifying the $15 billion valuation. It's really where the majority of the value of Ginkgo is going to come from in the future, that app store.
Great, thanks, Jason. So a bunch of questions have come in on the platform around, I think folks who are building their models and trying to kind of get under the hood and get under the weeds. And so, Mark, I was hoping, one of the topics we didn't cover in the last session was really some of the underlying drivers of the model, and in both the foundry business and the downstream. How would you guide people towards their sort of modeling endeavors around this business?
Yeah, so I guess the way that we think about it is we start with foundry capacity and our ability to improve throughput in that capacity. And so as you know, and as we've discussed, one of the tenets of our strategy is to get more programs on the Foundry. As we get more programs on the Foundry, that drives a Foundry scale economic. It also pushes us to make investments in technology, which gives us productivity improvements. And so you start with Foundry capacity and how much of that do we have and how quickly can we add to that. We're then sort of focused in getting more programs on the Foundry. That drives a scale economic, that builds code base. All of that in turn enhances the value proposition. That scale economic results in a cost savings that we can pass on to our customers. And so we do that. It also, like I said, enhances the code base, which makes what we're offering more valuable, and it makes the next project easier and faster. And so collectively over time, and we've talked about that flywheel, what you see is the revenue is increasing and us taking on more programs, and the profit, the overall company profitability starts to improve. And as you've seen, we're expecting to start approaching break even on the EBITDA line around end of 2024, sort of roughly speaking. And what you're seeing there in terms of a driver is really we're just leveraging our R&D and SG&A infrastructure on a higher revenue base. And none of that includes the downstream value share. So the other sort of core driver of the business is that you will start to see the monetization of either royalty or equity interests also contributing to the bottom line.
Great, thanks, Mark. So you mentioned that the sort of first element of the model is capacity. Barry, you talked a lot about Knight's Law. I think folks find that concept really interesting, but how the hell do we keep Knight's Law going, and what gives you confidence that that we can maintain that going forward? What are the kind of top challenges that you see?
Great question. One we always like to talk about. First of all, I have to say that neither I nor anyone at Ginkgo can predict the future, but I'll note that neither could Gordon Moore in 1965 when he made the prediction that ultimately became the Moore's Law that we know today. Instead, he saw a trend, which we have seen and we have shown you all, and he saw no fundamental physical reason why that trend could not continue. All that was required was continuing investment driven by tremendous commercial opportunity. And we believe that the exact same conditions are true today in synthetic biology. So we just need to do the work. To be more practical about the answer, Knight's Law is driven by automation and miniaturization of the way we do the work in our foundries. We have a lot of low-hanging fruit still to be captured or still to be collected in terms of how we do that work and how we automate it. And that's just using the technologies that are mature and available to us today. As we work with our partners, folks like Twist and Berkeley Lights, and as we see how their technologies are improving, we can see how we're going to be able to continue to increase the scale and drive down the unit costs of the work in our foundries. So in the midterm, we look at those kinds of technologies for better DNA printing, better measurement of how cells are performing, greater miniaturization as being the drivers of Knight's Law. And then as we look to the longer term, the reality is that cells and DNA are really, really tiny, and they make copies of themselves very easily. And so what that points to is the ability for us to really miniaturize our operations and our work down to the scale of individual cells and molecules. And in the kind of multiplexed library-based work we do already, we're able to realize that potential in certain cases today, and in the future in many cases, or most of the cases of the projects that we work on. So we see both near, mid, and long-term ways to continue to drive the scale and the efficiencies that are going to drive Knight's Law.
Great, thanks, Barry, and Patrick. I think code base is always I think an interesting topic for folks, and it definitely is part of Knight's Law, but we don't have the same kind of historical metrics that we've been able to kind of plot out for people around code base. And so I think we get a lot of questions around how do you measure code base, like what metrics should we be looking for, what are you gonna report on? And so would love you to just talk a little bit about how you, as the head of code base, how you think about measuring code base and really what matters there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, we're still trying to wrap our heads around code base and how best to quantify it. But, for us, there are kind of two key factors that we try to keep track of. One is just sheer quantity. And that's really where we leverage the scale of the foundry to make sure that we're basically sourcing, generating, and characterizing as much unique biology as we can year over year, right? So from my perspective, we actually rely a lot on Knight's Law to say, if we are actually scaling the ability of the foundry to improve the number of operations we can do year over year, from my perspective, that means we can continue to drive the quantity of new code base that we can develop. Now, how do we use that to actually help our customers achieve their goals faster? That's where quality comes in. And one of the metrics we use for quality is how often are we actually reusing particular code base assets, right? Some really important stuff sits on the shelf for a year or more before we find the right opportunity to reuse it. But certain things we go back to over and over again. And that's what we're trying to really quantify into what we're calling cell development kits, basically playbooks that we can apply over and over again, reusing valuable code base that has been proven over the course of multiple projects. So again, Knight's Law means that we can really deliver on quantity and mine through that for useful information and useful new strategies and designs. But ultimately, reuse is how we measure quality and something that we pay a lot of attention to.
Great, thanks. So maybe then wrapping up the
small addition, Patrick, I think the CDK is an inspired name, right? So this is coming out of software development kits, right? And as I understand it, this is part of the package you get, as part of engaging with like a mobile phone ecosystem, right? If you want to develop an app, you get, from Apple, like an SDK, and it helps you make, put the button on the phone in the right place. It's existing code that makes it easier to launch an application. And in exchange for that, because that's a valuable thing for a developer, Apple's getting to take a toll on those apps that get developed, right? And so this is very much in line, even the naming of things here, this idea of the CDK, this is really, we think the evolution of genetic engineering and cell programming, we're taking lessons from software to do it. And I think this is what I'm really excited about, is these CDKs.
Thanks, guys. So just rounding out the capacity topic, an important driver of our capacity is also just our operations and how well we function together as a team. Obviously, folks have seen our sort of vision for the future, and that involves a lot of growth. So Reshma, I'd love, this is my own question. This one didn't get submitted. I just like talking about it. I'd love to just ask you what you see as the biggest kind of operational hurdles and how you think about scaling up an organization like Ginkgo over the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think we really think about the challenges of scaling on sort of 2 fronts. The first is really around our culture, right? So we talk a lot here at Ginkgo about growing our culture. And that's because for a mission-driven company like Ginkgo, our team is fundamental and instrumental to Ginkgo's success overall, right? And the biggest impact we can have on our team is really fostering a culture here at Ginkgo that helps us attract the best talent, retain the best talent. And really, I think at the end of the day, culture has a huge outsized influence on that team's performance, right? And again, team performance equals Ginkgo success. And so we really like to think about our culture as not just who we are today, but who we aspire to be. And so continuing to grow our culture as we grow the company, I think is fundamental to being able to scale effectively. I think the second front that we think about, sort of the operational challenges of scaling, is really around all the normal things like organizations have to do when they scale, right? They need to specialize roles, they need to add organizational structure, they need to introduce process, right? And I think Ben Horowitz actually writes really eloquently on this topic. He talks about how you need to give ground grudgingly to this stuff, right? And so at Ginkgo, we really try to balance, like, we know as we grow, we need to add, specialization, we need to add process, we need to add, structure to our organization. but we don't want to get ahead of our skis on that because there's a cost and an overhead to all of those things. And so striking that right balance of giving ground grudgingly to adding those things to our company as we grow is really important. And we're really fortunate because we have board members like Christian Henry and Shyam Sankar who have led fast growing technology companies. And so they've been a great source of advice and guidance as we grow.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, so kind of going back to Mark's answer earlier, first input is capacity, then we actually have to go find some demand. So Ina and Jen, and Matt, we're lucky to have you guys on the phone because you lead our commercial business. So maybe Ina, I'll start with you. We got a question from Vero Analytics on Twitter saying, how far into the future do you generally have visibility on bookings, and what are the limits on that visibility? And so I might just ask, like, you to talk about kind of our sales cycle and process and what that looks like at Ginkgo and the visibility that Vera is asking about.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. So let me start with the deal process to really kind of provide a bit of context to that question. So when we work with a potential customer on a project, we really start with a collaborative process. We sit down with our customers to define what are their strategic requirements. And from that, we define the specific technical needs and how our foundry can actually support that. And that's when we get kind of the early start of really figuring out what the project looks like. Then we enter into a parallel path of the technical teams really discussing with our customer's technical team on the specific requirements under what we call a technical development plan. And in that technical development plan, we'll define the deliverables, the milestones, the objectives, the timeline, et cetera, and the budget associated with those programs. And at the same time, the commercial discussions also take place. And we have a cross-functional deal team that really kind of drive those discussions forward, going from figuring out what the framing of the deal looks like, what the term sheet looks like, all the way to negotiating the final terms of the agreement that includes all aspects ranging from economics and intellectual property terms. So once we complete that negotiation process and the technical teams have a defined and approved TDP in place, we then kick off the project. And that's where the commercial operations team really kind of takes center stage and liaise with the customer to not only implement the collaboration internally at Ginkgo, but also to foster the communications to make sure that the collaboration is as transparent and as successful as possible. So the deal process is not a 2-week process. It takes time to make that happen. And so we have a number of deals that are moving through this deal process in any single point in time. And we're constantly monitoring and reviewing the status of these deal negotiations as it moves through the different stages in the pipeline. And the pipeline includes deals that are ranging from very mature conversations where we're in deep discussions on the definitive agreement, all the way to early stage conversations where we just signed a CDA with a customer and trying to figure out what the projects are that we will collaborate together, and you have everything in between. So during this process, as we get more and more visibility into the technical development plan and understand what our deliverables would be, we have better indication of what our revenues would look like. Because by the time the TDPs are in place, we have very good visibility into the revenues that we would expect.
Great, thanks, Ina. So that's like the first half of the question, which is like, how do we win customers? And then we have to actually deliver for customers. So Jen, you've in the past run our commercial operations team, and now you run both commercial operations as well as business development. And so we got a couple of questions on scale up and sort of customer success. So from, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this person's name on Twitter, Toftgard, I think. What do you do to ensure a successful scale up to commercial production? Do you have pilot facilities, or do you leave all that to the customers? And then from Dominic Doe 2 on Twitter, the bottom line, how fast can you scale a molecule? At what size tank? How many molecules have you scaled? At what size production? This is the bottleneck for synthetic biology. So how are you doing it? Can you address
Yeah,
this?
sure. So Jason mentioned earlier that we share in a piece of the value for the programs we work on for our customers. So that means we don't just send over a vial of engineered organisms and say, good luck. Instead, we have a deployment team that has expertise in fermentation scale up, downstream process development, QA, QC. And so they work both in the lab we have here in Boston at headquarters, also with some mid-scale pilot partners that we have and also a contract manufacturing organization. We have a tolling arrangement for some products that we do make ourselves. And so that team has worked on a variety of commercialization efforts. So we've scaled a number of compounds, including flavors and fragrances, proteins, other chemicals, many of which are on the market today. When the scale, you talked about what scale, so that's highly dependent on the product that we're making, and so scale is production scale is relative to the customer. On the very high end, we've scaled up processes up to several hundred thousand liters, and some higher value compounds production scale is some might think it's quite small. So we work with customers in different ways because our customers have a variety of expertise in production themselves. So that might mean that we're transferring processes directly to them, to their pilot facilities or their production facilities. That might mean we're partnering with them to find a sort of a supply chain manufacturing company that would work for them. In some cases, they're on the market to buy a facility themselves, and we've helped them do that as well. So a variety of models that we work with customers there, all oriented around getting products to market. And then you asked a question about how fast is this? I think time is highly dependent on scale, familiarity with the processes, what the capital requirements are, if people have a facility themselves. And so because we work on such a wide variety, it's hard to answer that directly. We do have a couple tricks up our sleeve to speed that up. One of that is that we have an iterative nature of engineering organisms. So often we're able to transfer intermediate strains that they can start working with right away. And that both gives us feedback back into our engineering process, as well as speeds up the scale up to commercialization.
Great, thanks guys.
Maybe I'll add one small bit to it, just again to hammer home this idea of the App Store, right? So one of the other things you're going to get, on the tech side by participating in an App Store ecosystem is they're going to help you with distribution, right? Because they want your app to get out to as many customers as possible, because the mobile phone company is going to be collecting value every time you sell that app or when someone does a purchase through it. Very much the same, Jen's team on operations. We want these cells to go to market because Ginkgo is going to get value back when they do. So this is like an adjacent capability to our cell programming. It's kind of like, Apple gives you the program, the SDK and the distribution, right? Ginkgo is going to give you the CDK, and we're going to help you with deployment and fermentation through our partner network, right? And that's 100% in line with our business model here.
Helpful clarity. Thanks, Jason. You're getting good at the 30-second explanation. So maybe we won't get those comments on our next investor day. So we love those comments. So thanks, Ina and Jen, for the help understanding sort of how we work with our customers and come up with those collaborations. Maybe just we can now touch on a couple areas of growth that I think are really capturing everyone's attention. And those two sectors are sort of pharma, which is certainly a real growth area for us, especially over the past year, and then biosecurity. So maybe, Ina, starting with pharma, we got a question also from Vero Analytics, a lot of questions from Vero Analytics. What areas can Foundry be most readily applied to right now in the biopharma sector, and what is at Ari Baldegrin's vision? Ari is unfortunately not here with us, although we're thrilled he's joining the board. But Ina, can you talk a little bit about how we're approaching pharma and what pharma sees in our platform right now?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you again for the question. We're super excited to have Ari on board. We're really looking forward to working with him and getting his insights and advice into some of the areas that we're really excited about. So this is huge for us. There are many areas in pharma that we're really excited about, and it ranges everywhere from the drug discovery and development process at the front end to the manufacturing process at the tail end, once a drug candidate has been FDA approved. Just to give you an example of some of the projects that we've done so far. So in the area of mRNA vaccines, which now we all know how valuable they are and what they can do, we've worked with Moderna, and we're working with others as well in the space in the production of key raw materials in the manufacturing of mRNA vaccines. It's going to be an area that we will continue to focus on, and we're really excited about the different possibilities of using the platform to improve the manufacturing process for these important therapeutics and life-saving therapeutics in many instances, especially as those are being used for cancer. We have a deal that we announced not too long ago with Biogen, where we are developing a next-gen AAV production platform for gene therapy. And that's a really exciting area for us to be digging deep into. We previously have signed a deal with Roche where we use our genome mining platform to discover novel antibiotics. So that is less in the manufacturing side, but more in the upfront drug discovery and development side. And along the same category of drug discovery and development, during COVID, we worked with a small AI-enabled drug discovery company called Toshin. They are now acquired by Absci, where we used our foundry to help express and screen thousands of antibody candidates that they have uncovered during their computational process and find those that are neutralizing against COVID-19. So that's an exciting area that we look to do more in the antibody discovery and development area. We're also working with others to improve the manufacturing of APIs, small molecules, and biologics. And we're also excited about cell therapy. There's a lot we can do in the area of cell therapy, whether it is to optimize the CAR constructs to make them ultimately more efficacious and more manufacturable, as well as working with manufacturers of cell therapy to help make their process more robust. So the way we see pharma is that as the pharma sector continues to use biology as a way to develop novel therapeutics or improve new or discover or improve these newer modalities, we'll continue to see new applications of the Ginkgo Foundry to help solve specific biology cell programming problems. And what we're seeing is precisely that. There's as more of these new pharma companies and big pharma companies are looking for specific ways to address the near-term challenges. They now see that cell programming is a very, very valuable enabler to help them get to their ultimate goals.
And I was on mute. It's never too late in the pandemic to figure out how to unmute yourself. So that's one really important growth area for us, of course. Thank you, Ina. The second area that's obviously been newer and really impactful is biosecurity, and specifically this year, K-12 testing. So Matt, I'd love you to talk about another elephant in the room. I think is like what happens to biosecurity when COVID's over. I think we're all hoping and praying that life gets back to normal. What happens to this business in 2022, 2023?
Yeah, thanks, Anna Marie. And look, I think this is the first part of this is everybody's experienced, right? So I think it's very clear that globally COVID has shown us the need for this forward-thinking, technology-first integrated approach to biosecurity. Biology has caused massive damage over the last year, and it's something that we feel very strongly and have been working on as a team for the last 15 months that we can do something to help. But that's a pandemic moment, right? The second piece that's really important, if you think about building a biological engineering platform, doing what we are doing, building an app store, and you use the digital revolution as a metaphor, right? Cybersecurity is a massive business to enable the digital ecosystem to work. There will be a massive industry at some point in biosecurity to power this biological manufacturing revolution. That is something that we feel very strongly about from a platform standpoint, that because biology is so powerful, we also need to be building the tools of biosecurity for that purpose. So for us, there's this two-sided mission orientation to build the platform in a secure and transparent and caring way with biosecurity tools, but also to help respond to pandemics. This is not the last pathogen that will have pandemic potential. And so the direct question, though, of what happens to the business is really an interesting one. It's pretty clear to us it's a matter of scale and timing, not really of whether it will develop. We're seeing indications that governments are taking the response to this pandemic very seriously. Private companies are thinking about what biosecurity looks like. In the US alone, we think that the reports are $16 trillion of economic output, GDP lost due to this pandemic. People are saying we should spend $20 to $40 billion a year to protect the world from the next pandemics. We're the one of the major providers of K-12 surveillance testing across the country, something that's a new thing that people haven't done in the past. So we're excited about it, but we're also cautious because we're still in the midst of the pandemic, right? So from a standpoint of like what we're looking at, how we're thinking about it, how we're guiding our partners and otherwise, it's both of those. Excited, important long-term mission component, and being cautious about setting what, how, and on what time that will become a really large and robust market. But ultimately something that we care deeply about and are spending a lot of time on.
Thanks, Matt. And second element of care that's I think really important to us relates to a really nice question that we got in that says, how and where do you draw the line with requests, either from, and this is for you, Jason, from either commercial or government sources that may raise ethical concerns because of the potential uses from the results? Are you prepared to deny requests that cross that line despite potential revenue losses?
Yeah, this is a super good question. And Matt touched on this, but we do think it's really important to note that we do care how our platform is used in the world, right? As we enter an era where you can program cells like you program computers, that's a big deal. Biology is responsible for our food, our atmosphere, clean water. As we're living through this pandemic, our public health, and so starting from a footing that we do care what happens with our platform. It isn't just as simple as well, whatever someone pays for. It is an important line to draw. I'll point out one of the things that was really interesting during COVID. It's like I think people tend, actually I think Governor Patrick touched on this during the Investor Day presentation. He said it's a false choice between like doing good and making money, being a successful company. It's not quite so simple. I agree with that. I think people frequently imagine, okay, the thing you're not going to do and not make money doing. But what we also saw during the pandemic is it was so volatile. Things were moving so quickly. And there were all these questions of like, can you do that? And you would make these decisions to say, well, I don't know. Is it going to get schools open? Is it going to help, this thing in society? Right. And those are caring how your platform's used too, right? So it can also be ways that would actually lead to expanding the business if it's the right thing to do, right? And so I do think this is an important topic going forward. I'm not going to pretend we have it all figured out. It's going to be a collective question for society, how we want to deploy engineered biology in the future. But we want to start by saying we care how the platform is used.
Thanks, Jason. So we're just about out of time, so I'm just going to do a couple more questions. The next set are for me. But I just like the Twitter handles, so I'm going to read them all. And it's around the process here for the SPAC transaction. So SPAC Doggy Dog wants to know when we expect the ticker to change to DNA. And then, a couple other folks asked, what's the status of the S4? When do we believe the final one will be filed? So when is it, how's the process going, and when is this expected to close? So, nothing at this point that would indicate any change in the timing. We're still expecting to close in the third quarter of this year. We have received the first round of comments from the SEC and would expect to file our First Amendment sometime next week. Obviously, we can't control the timing of SEC review, but still expect that we'll be closing in the third quarter. But obviously, at this point, can't provide a precise date, but we'll update folks as that goes. All right, so the last question here is for you, Jason. There are two that are related. So Costa Michaelides wants to know, how long till I can code up a full-on fire-breathing dragon in my garage, because then I can launch my dragon toasted bagels business. And then Chris Oswald would like to know if he can be the first one to fly a dino.
Yeah, so 20 years. Yeah.
So that's Costa. And are you making Chris a promise?
I defer to our head of code base, Patrick. The man who's designed more synthetic DNA than anyone on planet Earth. Patrick, what's your estimates on Dragon?
I'll add a plus or minus 5 years to that estimate, just to have some error bars. But
so what did you say, Jason? 20 or 25?
Yeah,
20. All right, so 15 to 25 years. Costa will be able to code up a full fire-breathing dragon in his garage. Yes. And Chris is going to be able to be the first one to fly a dino, or you're going to reserve that right?
I think we'll have to have a charity auction for who gets
Oh,
to.
I like that. Okay, charity auction. All right, you
We're
heard
gonna
it here
apply for a
first.
job here at Ginkgo. We have a, yeah, if you want to fly, be the first one on the dragon, you should be working here. Yeah.
You need to make there's a flying dinosaurs is Chris's question. Yeah, you need to make the dinosaur. All right. Well, I know we're about out of time here, and everyone spent a lot of time with us today learning about the business. So just want to say a heartfelt thank you to everybody for joining us today and spending your time learning about Ginkgo. Jason, I don't know if you have any parting thoughts, but we're wrapping up the day here and look forward to being able to host you guys in person hopefully next year.
Yeah, thanks everybody for the time today. Really, it's wonderful to have a chance to speak with you all.